Moon Knight is a complicated TV show. On one hand, it's probably my favorite MCU show yet. Oscar Isaac was incredible, Marc and Steven were great protagonists with an engaging story, and Marvel finally put down the cookie cutter and tried something new. On the other hand, it's plagued by the same issues as the other Disney Plus shows like Loki and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, that issue being a lack of episodes. But in the case of Moon Knight, things were a little different. Rather than having a full season of equally okay episodes, Moon Knight completely sacrificed the quality of its finale for the sake of having the rest of the season be good, well-paced episodes, ultimately both solving and creating problems, which is exactly why Moon Knight takes 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So let's talk about what Moon Knight's about, what's great about it, and where and why things go wrong. Moon Knight is a show about Stephen Grant, a highly intelligent yet clumsy man who works at a museum gift shop. Despite his bubbly personality, the show does everything in its power to show that Stephen is a complete loser, history nerd, absolute outcast, has no friends, the whole shebang. The closest he has to human connection is talking to a literal human statue. By day, Stephen's coworkers in life step on his lack of confidence, and by night, he suffers from a sleeping disorder, unable to differentiate his dreams from reality. But eventually, we learn that his dreams are real, and that Stephen is suffering from dissociative identity disorder rooting from childhood trauma. The other identity within him being the badass mercenary Marc Spector. Stephen discovers that both he and Marc are the avatar of the Egyptian god Khonshu. When a mission of Marc's went south, leaving him on the verge of death, he pledged his service to Khonshu in exchange for life. And while Stephen was completely unaware of Marc's existence, Marc and Khonshu were on a mission to defeat Arthur Harrow, Khonshu's former avatar, from releasing rivaling god Ammit. While Khonshu punishes those who've already commit crime, Ammit can see people's future and punish them beforehand, with her followers even admitting they'd sacrifice babies. Through life and death, Marc and Stephen's relationship grows and they learn to coexist. Ultimately, the two unlikely friends develop an unbreakable bond, learning to work together to defeat Harrow as well as repaying their debt to Khonshu. If you haven't seen the show yet, that plot probably sounds insane. And trust me when I tell you, it's surprisingly good. So first up, let's talk about the good stuff because there's a lot of it. And what better way to get started than talking about Oscar Isaac's performance? If you don't know who Oscar Isaac is, he's the "they can fly now" guy from The Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, they fly now! They fly now? They fly now!
So when I saw him cast as a main character in this show, I threw up in my mouth. But against all expectations, he does an incredible job. And not only does he do an incredible job, but he does it twice by playing Marc, a hardened, brooding American mercenary, and Stephen, who's, well, he's Stephen.
Like a butterfly, stinging like a bee. My name's Stephen with a V.
The idea of an actor playing multiple characters isn't new to Marvel. Willem Dafoe did it back in 2002 Spider-Man and did an incredible job. But the fact that Oscar Isaac does it for 6 episodes of a TV series, including action scenes, real-time conversation, and high-demanding emotional scenes makes it really incredible. Stephen's got a British accent that helps differentiate between Marc and him, but the two of them have such distinct mannerisms, movement, and facial expressions, you can tell who's in control before they even speak. The show does a great job taking on Marc's struggles with mental health, as well as taking on a topic as serious as child abuse. It was something new that we hadn't seen before on screen, and I really liked it. Now, I'm not saying Marvel needs serious topics like child abuse, but when put side by side with Marvel's recent cookie-cutter heroes, Moon Knight's one of the few pieces that show Marvel has any serious creativity left. That creativity peaking in the 5th episode, Asylum, where Marc and Stephen must relive memories to balance their scales, and if they can't, their souls will be lost forever. Eventually, we discover that Stephen was Marc's fabrication, his identity being copied from a low-budget action-adventure movie. And after the first few episodes made Stephen out to be the main character / original identity, it completely subverts your expectations. Even in episode 1, you see the cracks start to form, and it's a shocking realization for both Stephen and the viewer. Unless you're a nerd and read the comics, of course. Not that the show shouldn't follow the comic, but I'm just gonna judge this as an individual piece. And something I loved in the show was the idea that Marc and Stephen only communicated through reflective surfaces. Marc even saying it takes all of your effort to just be a fly on the wall. that being the case because they're trying to block each other out. But as their relationship becomes stronger, they start working together, eventually switching personalities back and forth within conversation and even action sequences. Not to mention that the transitions look so convincing. It's almost like you can see the light behind his eyes changing to someone else, and it's so cool. And speaking of action sequences, because this has been a really rough spot for the other MCU shows, I'm so pleased to tell you that Moon Knight is a whole lot better. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was fine. WandaVision, it starts getting a little rough. And oh my god, Loki was bad. Maybe my expectations are just so low, but Moon Knight's action sequences were much better. While they're few and far between and sometimes just skip, you can actually see what's going on because they don't cut the camera 3 times a second. And the 2 distinct fighting styles and weapons between Marc and Steven's Moon Knight and Mr. Knight was really cool. For some reason, Marvel thinks that CGI fight scenes look good, but they just don't. And that's made abundantly clear in the season finale. On one hand, you have this CGI abomination kaiju fight that doesn't impact the story whatsoever, and a goofy CGI Ethan Hawke.
They fly now!
On the other hand, you have Marc and Steven fighting Harrow and his goons in the streets of Cairo, and I was legitimately shocked by how good it looked. The transitions between Moon Knight and Mr. Knight were really creative, and they work together, switching control when one of their skill sets is more applicable. It's also great seeing Steven finally build some confidence in himself. And the reason it looks so good is because most of it was clearly filmed practically. And if you ask me, I'd say let the stuntmen do their job. The CGI department clearly has too much on their plate.
You one ugly motherfucker.
Something else I both liked and disliked about the show was the secret identity Jake Lockley. I'll say what I don't like about it in a bit, but I did think it was a really fun idea to include. The little hints scattered throughout the show made me increasingly more curious, and at this point, I'm actually looking forward to what Moon Knight has next. Something that I loved about this show was the bangin' soundtrack. And another thing Marvel changed up was how they present their humor by trying physical humor for what might be the first time ever. I just hope we're past the witty jokes. I'm sick of them, okay? Let them die with Tony Stark. So if you're tired of the same predictable mumbo jumbo that Marvel's been spewing out these last few years, then Moon Knight will definitely subvert your expectations. And not in a bad way. Don't get me wrong, I love the MCU, but it's okay to try something new. It's okay not to have a cameo or reference every other scene. We've had this connected universe of heroes for the last 15 years, and at this point it just feels a bit overdone. And with how Moon Knight turned out, with the exception of the finale of course, I really think they made the right call. And speaking of the finale, I've got to talk about the bad stuff. Now, I'm no producer, writer, director, nor do I have any qualifications in the film industry. I'm a humble customer, but there's a reason they say the customer's always right. And the customer says that 6 episodes is not a TV show. And that's the single biggest problem for MCU shows. While flawed, I thought Loki's plot was really interesting because there was so much to explore. The show literally gave the main character the ability to go anytime, any place in the entire universe. But because it was so short and the plot had to be rushed along each episode, we only saw like 3 places, including an entire episode spent in a Target. I left the show feeling like there was just so much more to be explored. Or the fact that the version of Loki in the show was the same Loki who had just tried to conquer Earth. But the show didn't have too much time, so, just show him some video of what his life would have been like, and hopefully he goes through 8 years of character development in 2 minutes. That makes fucking sense. Those 2 issues could have easily been fixed given more time. And then we have Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Probably the most frustrating of these shows yet. The idea of Bucky trying to make peace with what he did as the Winter Soldier was such an interesting topic to cover. Even though it wasn't technically him who killed the people as the Winter Soldier, seeing how a person would realistically deal with that experience and guilt was something I hadn't expected from a Marvel show. And it was easily the best plotline to come out of that show. But then it's completely dropped because Falcon, one of the known Avengers and savior of half the universe, couldn't get a loan. And we're running out of screen time, so apparently Falcon getting a loan is more important. Or the fact that the antagonist's motivation came from the poor state of the world after the reverse snap in Endgame. But the world doesn't look all that bad in the show. They just say it and expect you to believe them, which is kind of difficult when Spider-Man Far From Home kind of played it off as a joke.
They called it the blip.
It's almost like a little bit more runtime might have helped things out. So what exactly happened with Moon Knight? I'll be the first to admit Marvel is clearly learning from their mistakes, because unlike Loki and Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Moon Knight doesn't tell you things and just expect you to believe them. If anything, it wants you to question everything. And Steven makes a great protagonist because he's just a regular guy and you can put yourself in his shoes. Steven watches Harrow murder several people, was covered in blood, blacks in and out of a high-speed car chase, and then woke up in his apartment days later. His reaction to learning that he and Mark are Khonshu's avatar makes complete sense.
Oh my god, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I eat one piece of steak and then bam, I go bonkers.
It's only until Steven loses control to Mark by the end of episode 2 that Steven even begins to understand the gravity of his situation. And it's not until almost the end of the season that he and Mark finally make peace with each other. Moon Knight takes its time to help you understand Mark and Steven's journey, using the show don't tell strategy to make it all the more impactful. And unfortunately, that's exactly why the season finale of Moon Knight was really disappointing. It takes all the good things about this show and throws them in the trash. Now, at the end of episode 5, Mark was in the Egyptian afterlife. Steven was trapped for eternity in bone-dry dunes. Their body had just been gunned down by Harrow. Layla was hiding in the tomb from Harrow and his men. Ammit had yet to be introduced, all while Khonshu was still imprisoned by the gods. Despite having the most work to do, the finale was the shortest episode in the entire series. And I think it might be the shortest episode of an MCU show yet. So after writing a well-paced, thought-out story of character arcs, how'd the finale tie up all these plot points? Well, with a little editing magic, baby, anything can happen. Despite Harrow having a conversation with Layla revealing he knows a lot about her and her family, somehow he and his followers don't notice her hitching a ride on their convoy. Well, she did have a hood on, so that's pretty sneaky. That's a good disguise. Harrow, a completely mortal man with a power stick, was able to single-handedly murder 5 gods. If it's that easy, then why didn't Ammit just do that with her last avatar? Well, hey, maybe she just didn't think of it. Remember when Steven died 10 minutes ago? A death that hit so hard after he and Mark finally understood what they meant to each other. Well, Steven's okay, because Mark just decided he was gonna go save him. Because why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he save his best friend and escape like Hippo Lady said they could 5 minutes ago? And that begs the question, why would Hippo Lady tell Layla to free Khonshu to get Mark and Steven back, only to shortly after tell Mark that Steven was gone and he should enjoy his peace in the afterlife? And then, once Mark and Steven try and come back, Hippo Lady goes and helps them? I don't know. Why is there a kaiju fight between Khonshu and Ammit? If they can just fight, then what's the point of having avatars at all? And it doesn't make much sense because Khonshu lost that fight and Mark and Steven just managed to trap Ammit in stone no problemo. So what does it matter anyway? I'm guessing the only reason it was included was because the director really wanted this shot. I also think the writers realized they completely disregarded the moral debate between Khonshu and Ammit's beliefs the entire show. By talking about it during their fight was at least something, but you know, it didn't really work out. Episodes 1 through 5 were pretty well paced and didn't really have the space for it. And I think if they had a little bit more time, then maybe they could tell their story to the fullest. Maybe they wouldn't have to make the choice between sacrificing an entire season and cramming everything into a finale. And speaking of cramming, how does Layla even know how to trap Ammit? It seems like a really important part of the story, but we get the worst explanation.
How do we do it?
We need more avatars than we have.
How does she know how to do this? And if it were Khonshu and Hippo Lady telling him what to do, then why would Layla have asked the middle-aged bozo anyway? Or wouldn't Hippo Lady just tell her how? They easily could have just had Khonshu and Hippo Lady take over their bodies like they did earlier in the show. But I guess the writers just forgot, and they only could have trapped Amit because Harrow was defeated off screen. To add, Mark doesn't end up killing Harrow because Layla said he was free. Who says he's free? Khonshu said to give him the smoke. Then Mark's just like, oh, Layla told me not to, so I guess you won't kill him then. And Khonshu doesn't care. Harrow even said in episode 2 that the most Khonshu can do is make the wind blow. It's all in Mark's hands whether he does something or not, and there are no outlying consequences if Mark doesn't follow Khonshu's demands. I get Khonshu threatened to make Layla his avatar, so why didn't Mark just tell her that? Steven did it right away when he found out, and when Khonshu asked Layla to be his avatar, she just said no. So why did Mark even keep working for Khonshu when he could have just said, nah fam, I ain't cool with it no more? That also means that Mark abandoned Layla for no reason. He's also staying with Khonshu for no reason, unless he has some personal desire to stop Harrow, of which isn't explored. It goes against the fact that Mark seems like a pretty smart guy, and you'd think he'd figure it out. Or maybe the writers just totally messed up. And I get there's a third personality in Mark and Steven's body, and like I said, I think that's an awesome idea to explore. And I also get that Marvel loves their after credit scenes, but if we saw Jake Lockley take control and defeat Harrow rather than just cut the camera again, I think it would have been an incredible reveal. At this point, you'd think Mark, Steven, and the viewer would have figured out his existence by now, and it almost feels like the writers think we're too stupid to figure it out. What's really disappointing is that this was originally a series finale, which Marvel has since changed to calling it a season finale. In an interview, Oscar Isaac himself said that this was the story that was meant to be told. I'm really hopeful that a second season would clear up some of these issues, but knowing this is how Marvel originally intended to end the story of Moon Knight was pretty underwhelming. I know I'm being overly critical, and some of these flaws I really didn't notice on my first watch through. Given the amount of loose ends to tie up, the finale was the best it could have been. But considering the massive budget for such a short TV show, and the mass amount of resources backing it, it made the finale of Moon Knight really underwhelming. Especially considering this would have been a great mid-season point for the show. Instead of the writers forgetting to tell Mark that Hippo Lady was still trying to help him, what if he had to go on some sort of journey or trial in the afterlife? Moon Knight only touches the surface of Mark's guilt of being a mercenary and a killer, and given more time, it would have been such an interesting topic to cover. And facing the guilt of being a killer is exactly what was skipped over in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So Marvel kind of fumbled the bag twice. And the idea of Mark fighting to save Steven would have been such a great contrast between the rocky start of their relationship. Almost all of those problems were from the finale alone. The reason I described the show as 2 steps forward and 1 step back is because of how it stacks up against the other Disney Plus shows. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was 6 rushed episodes. Plot points and reasoning are crammed and rushed for the sake of pushing the story along, and each episode is equally as okay as the last. In the case of Moon Knight, the first 5 episodes were pretty darn good. They were fun, stressful, shocking, and took their time to tell an interesting story, as well as covering difficult topics like mental health and child abuse. The only really bad episode was the finale. What the shows have in common is that they both suffered from a lack of runtime. Moon Knight choosing 5 good episodes and 1 bad one rather than 6 mediocre episodes proved to be much more enjoyable, but the underlying issue still isn't fixed. Moon Knight definitely showed a movement in the right direction, but considering the sheer volume of shows Disney has in the works, I don't think they're going to take the time to figure it out. Disney needs to slow down. As a company, they have deadlines, but if the quality decline from season 1 of Mandalorian to the Book of Boba Fett has to say anything, it's that Disney just needs to slow down. I get that money does the talking in the business world, but if you continuously push out worse and worse content, eventually people aren't going to care. Now, in terms of other issues with the show, there actually aren't too many. I wish we could have learned more about Harrow's past and motivations. The man's willing to kill babies, so I'd really love to know why. Layla was pretty interesting too, but there was nothing to connect with her on. She had no character depth, and it felt like they could have done a whole lot more with her. Otherwise, the only thing left that really bugged me was the jackals, mostly because they look like the creatures from Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed.